Hi, it's Mark at FBA to USA. Come to FBA2USA.com and let me help you launch your brand inside the USA. Now, I've been getting a few questions from members, and I thought I would summarize kind of the frequently asked questions that I'm getting most of. I'm going to call it barcodes, bank accounts, and business structure. And yes, this is aimed at people who are setting up on Amazon FBA for the first time. So, barcodes. It is true that you can get yourself a direct account with a wholesale barcode supplier. In Australia and the UK, and indeed in the USA, GS1 is the most common supplier of barcodes on a wholesale basis. And if you get a GS1 account, you will get a package. I think the minimum is about 1,000 barcodes, and that will cost you a GS1 membership, which can vary from country to country, but let's call it $500 a year in order to be in that. Now, that's something that you can definitely do, and if you are the, if you like, tier 1 barcode owner, then you have an advantage that if your product is extremely successful, there is no one in the world that will turn you down on the basis of your barcode when you want to list that product with them. What I mean by that is there are some wholesale retailers like Walmart in the USA who won't use a product unless it's got a barcode from a barcode supplier that's held on that wholesale account. So that's just something to think about if you plan to be really successful. But if you're ready to sell in Walmart, then you're probably not watching this video right now. So that's barcodes. The easier way to deal with barcodes, although it is more expensive per barcode, is to buy yourself a pack of 10 or 20, remembering that in a decent FBA strategy, you're very unlikely to launch more than 20 or 30 products, at least in the first year or a couple of years, because if you do, you're going to lose track of what you're doing, and you're going to make it quite difficult to explain to each set of customers in a niche why they should buy the product and why they should buy it from you, which, as I always say, is one of the fundamental things that you want to be able to understand yourself before you try and get your customers to understand it. So, if you want to get barcodes on what you would call a tier 2 or retail basis, you can get them by just Googling buy barcodes, and you will find a supplier that can supply them to you in packs of 10. Also, most of these suppliers will also do your labeling for you, and that's something that you might want to think about. When you get the barcode itself, that's a digital file and an actual barcode. If you want the label, that's an additional product. So separate in your mind barcodes from barcode labels. Okay, bank accounts. It is very useful to have a US dollar bank account if you're selling in the USA. And the reason for that is most of your costs are going to be in US dollars, even if you're buying in China. Most of your advertising costs are going to be in US dollars. And if you start to build out your business, you will probably find yourself paying subscription fees for hosting and things, most of which are going to be in US dollars. So fundamentally, you've got what's called a US functional currency for your business, if it is primarily a US-based business. A US bank account is definitely useful, but if you're starting out, it's not essential. It's definitely not the first thing you need to do. So consider before you try and get a US dollar bank account whether or not you need the hassle to set up front. If you don't want to do this, it's perfectly acceptable as long as you're in a Western or non-prohibited country to get Amazon to pay you in funds which they will convert into the funds of your country and pay you in that currency. So I'm in Australia. I often get Amazon to pay directly into an Australian bank account in the name of my company here. For example, I could also do that in the UK, and I could do that anywhere else, as long as in the process of identifying that bank account to Amazon in the first place, that account is in the same name as the account holder. Little documentation point you might want to keep on top of. So that's something that you can bear in mind. You don't need to go and set yourself up a US dollar bank account, and indeed the difficulties of doing so and you're not inside the USA might mean that you don't want to try and make that one of your critical path items up front. If you do decide that you want a US dollar bank account but you want to make it easier on yourself, then I do recommend a service called Payoneer, Payoneer.com. That is not a full bank account, but it allows you to provide a US dollar and US resident bank account to Amazon for them to pay funds into. Payoneer will then correctly attribute those funds to you, and you can withdraw them to your bank account in your home country. Just recognizing that in either case, if Amazon is paying you in your home country or if Payoneer is paying you in your home country, they will have to pay you in your local currency. So what I use Payoneer for is, if you like, a holding account to store US dollars in for making payments for my US dollar expenses. And then I repatriate funds in my home currency. Now, I do have a US dollar account, US dollar denominated, operating in my home country as well, but Amazon and Payoneer, neither of them can pay directly in US dollars into that account. So that's a step that, unless you open a US dollar account in your company's name inside the USA, you will have that additional piece of currency risk. But probably you're going to have domestic expenses in your home currency anyway, so it's not something to get too concerned about. Was that complicated enough for you? I hope so. It's plenty to think about when you get complex with currency issues as well as everything else. Okay. I also mentioned business structure. Well, business structure is a useful title, but there's a few things to think about. I have, in the course of the bank accounts, described having a company bank account several times. Now, if you've got a Payoneer account, unless you're doing quite large revenues, and I think that's about $15,000 a month from recollection, you'll probably have to start off with a, if you like, retail or non-company bank account. That's okay, because with Payoneer you can nominate the Payoneer account in a personal identity name, and then you can still, by providing documentation about your company, make sure that Payoneer will then on-pay those funds into your company account, remembering that they will always do it in the home currency of the country that they're paying to. So that's something. Nonetheless, having a corporate business structure is still recommended in any step. Plan for success, don't plan to try and save money. If you don't think big, you won't get big results. And the setup fees for a company is probably going to be in the order of 4 figures, i.e. thousands of dollars, maybe even thousands of pounds if you're in the UK, but it is well worth it for the additional layer of protection that it provides you when you're setting up inside the USA, and it also creates a nice separation of taxation for your company from you personally, which you don't really want to get tied up with personal liability for any aspect of what you're trying to do when you set up a business operating in another country. So the additional advantage is, when you seek an EIN from the IRS in the USA, how many acronyms was that? You will find that if you do that in your own name, that's going to be more difficult. If you do it in the company name up front, then you can have the same entity as the owner of the Amazon account, the tax entity in the USA, that's what the EIN is for with the IRS, and also with your bank account details back in your home jurisdiction and your corporate identity in that jurisdiction. Having that all lined up front is an expense, but it is one that is not worth trying to sidestep. So I hope that is helpful, and if you have questions on it, you can ask them right below here. If you have detailed questions on it, then I suggest you join the FBA to USA community and ask them inside, and I will give you even more detailed answers. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you at fba2usa.com.